Rivera. The webinar is part of a project, what we call Surlab project. It's a joint project between the research group Urban Project Collective Spaces and Local Identities of the Department of Architecture of the KU Leuven in Belgium, the group Unidad de Estudios Urbanos of the Universidad Católica de Santiago de Guayaquil, and the LIACTA Lab of the University of Cuenca. The project itself started last year, well, just 2 months before COVID came, and has the name Upgrading Informal Settlements by Co-Production of Inclusive Public Spaces, where we wanted to have several workshops with different stakeholders in 3 informal settlements in Guayaquil, with the University of the KU Leuven, the University in Guayaquil, and one in Cuenca. And that's kind of a different joint sessions on how could we produce with the different stakeholders in consolidated informal settlements, those kind of public spaces that are, of course, very important and interesting for a community. Of course, then COVID came, which means that we couldn't do not so much in situ. So this was a kind of challenge, although the university in Guayaquil did some workshops in the different locations. It was still quite hard, of course, to do the project. On the positive side, we could, because we wanted to have a kind of a seminar in situ, but now we have an online seminar, which means that we can have many different kind of people all over the world to present and to discuss. This is the second session. We had 3 seminars at the end of last year in the fall, and now we have 3 more in May and in June and July. The project itself is funded by the Flemish government. It's called VLIR UOS, and it's a South Initiative funding, which normally should give us the opportunity to do the different workshops. We just heard that the funding has been, let's say that normally the deadline of the project is the end of this year. It's been extended to August 2022. So perhaps we will have at the end, at the final kind of a workshop. Okay, I will present the 2 speakers. Normally the speakers have more or less a half hour to give their lecture. Then we have a discussion, then you have the second speaker, and then we have a kind of plenum discussion, where of course everybody can participate in the discussions. Okay, the first speaker is Giulia Testori. She's a project officer at B3 Unit, the territorial development of the GRC Joint Research Center of the European Commission. Previously, she was a research fellow in critical urban studies at the University of Leeds on a British Academy funding project titled Nova Vida, an investigation centered on the developing novel approaches for post-disaster resettlements in Ecuador. She holds 2 PhDs in urbanism and architecture from the University of Venice and the KU Leuven in Belgium. Her PhD thesis investigates on the spatial implications of Mingas in Quito. In 2018, she was urban technical consultant for the UN Habitat Mexico and Cuba. She graduated with magna cum laude from the Masters of Urbanism and Strategic Planning of MAUSP at KU Leuven and holds the European Postgraduate Master in Urbanism, the EMU. Her lecture is titled Inclusive Urbanism, Collective City Making, Participation and Design. And I give the word to Giulia, and I guess she will have to share her screen.
I will do it. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be with you today. Let me try and see if I can share it in a presenter view mode. Can you see it? Yeah. Okay.
Yes,
brilliant. Okay. So yes, this is the title of the presentation. I thought of dividing it into 4 parts. So one, it will look more at policies. The second one more at practices. The third one at city creation, and the fourth at utopic scenario. So what I'm presenting you today, it's a part of my PhD thesis, which was defended in 2019, and it was a joint PhD between UAV, University of Venice, and KU Leuven. And the broad objective of the research was to challenge the way in which cities are planned toward a more inclusive approach. Hence, a very broad objective, but at least an attempt. And to do so, I've chosen Ecuador as case study. It was very common for me to be asked, why did I choose such an exotic and far context from the one I'm from? And the inspiration came when I had the chance some years ago to read an article talking about the 2008 Ecuadorian constitution called Of the Buen Vivir, of good living. And I found it plenty of innovative concepts that could support a shift, not just in contemporary society, but precisely in the relation to city making. I had started analyzing these documents, focusing overall on topics such as the right to the city, participation, and autonomy. Yet, while analyzing the Ecuadorian capital, Quito, I couldn't find recent experiences, or at least very few, where this institutional principle were placed into practice. But I rather noticed a strong detachment between the theory, so the constitution, and the practice, what I've been seeing of this concept made into practice. But at the same time, I came to discover more and more Ecuador and its very old history of participation related to city making. As most of you know, the Article 31st of the Constitution, it's full of extremely interesting concepts. It mentions the right to the city, the right to public space, the exercise of economic, social, and cultural rights of the city, the right to difference, the preservation of multiple territorial cultures, the need for environmental justice, and the wish to achieve a balanced development between various territorial scales, and between others, the social function of properties. Those principles are not so common in other constitutions. And concerning participation, in general terms, you know that participation can be asserted by many ways. So it's about voting, protesting, public consultation. What I was searching for, it was participation related to urban planning. And in Ecuador, citizens' participation, it is considered a right, a guarantee. And the Constitution consecrates the participation of citizens as a fundamental principle. There are, however, two dangers facing participation. From one side, it could be banalized, and from the other way, it could be sort of spectacularized. And because participation, it is a practice that tends to be linked to the goodwill of people and not usually subject to a clear methodologies and principles and objectives. I've been going through a lot of the decolonial theory, and the colonial theorists have defined the Ecuadorian constitution as a decolonial act itself. However, in their many contributions, they discuss and consider topics like its reciprocity, post-capitalism, communality, etc., as always on a theoretical level. The thesis tried to make some of this concept more operational, to project an unbridged alternative, free from Western capitalist construction. And what would indeed signify, it's an incredible effort. And most likely, a project like this, try to make it in practice, those decolonial principles, looks very much like an utopia. So if we look at Quito's growth, as most of you know, we can see how from a compact and dense city, it expanded first north, then south, and then the eastern valleys, and through a dispersed pattern of isolated settlements characterized by, in some cases, progressive real estate speculation. This expansion, as we later see, are mostly outcome of what we could define in formal settlements. Looking at history, the 70s represented for Ecuador a real social and economic turning point. It could be described as a momentum in which many aspects coincided. It was a period of agricultural reforms. It was also the end of Victor Ibarra's dictatorship. It was the oil nationalization and the consequent great investments in infrastructure and industry. However, the boost in economy didn't reach all social sectors, and small and middle-sized farmers had almost no choices other than moving from, in some cases, their rural areas to move to urban ones. Once in the city, finding a job in the spreading industries of Quito wasn't the real dilemma. The greatest concern was that for the newcomers was extremely hard to access to the market, to the housing market. And there was a complete lack of social housing and urban facilities. As you mentioned at the beginning, one of the main topics of my research is Minga, and now I will tell you why. So, differently and similarly to most Latin American cities, the immense periphery of Quito is great outcome of land invasion. And what characterizes the Andean culture in this process of migration, different from other contexts, is that inhabitants from rural areas, in most cases, brought with them a century-long practice of self-management and self-construction called Minga. In my research, I reconstruct the evolution of this fascinating and yet very complex practice since the pre-Inca Empire, researching on how colonialism has co-opted it and how it still exists and how it is still a way of organizing and reproducing space. I won't go too deep on this because I know that most of you know perfectly of what I'm talking about. And I bet that also most of you have participated at least once in their life to Minga. But what the thesis attempted to do was filling a knowledge gaps. Minga's true literature have been discussed overall by sociologists, and apart from really one book I found dedicated completely to Minga, but published in 1957, I found just very scattered information, nothing from the architectural and urban side. And the main knowledge I gathered, it was actually through interviews. So the word Minga comes literally means requesting help, promising something in return. And a Minga is usually called to involve a group of people that work collectively on a particular task. That collective work is done for free and in the interest of the community. So there is no money involved. The Minga indeed has an equivalent meaning in Bolivia, Colombia, Chile, Ecuador, Peru, although in Chile it could be called as Mingaco, in Peru as Minca, in Colombia by Convite, and actually last year Catarina Ortiz made a great lecture inside this series about the Convite, and in Brazil, for example, by Adjunto or Muchirao. So Minga can serve to construct or conserve, for example, irrigation canals, trace, construct and pave roads, create squares, erect a bridge, build a roof of a house, a school, but also from the other side, plant a tree, for example, to avert erosion or clean a common space. And concerning the actors that are involved, it could be a group of relatives, of citizens of a neighborhood, of the members of a sport league, and they can interact by themselves or with the institution, generally without the involvement of the state. For some authors, the word reciprocity is precisely the most accurate to describe Minga. What I did is that I characterize it in two main different kinds. There are somehow I call it fundamental Mingas, which are based really on shaping the space of the city by working with water, electricity connection, construct a sewage system, etc. And then the other ones that are more auxiliary ones, I called it, and it is, for example, for cleaning a road, a school, to plant a tree, etc. Now, at this moment, unfortunately, I won't have the time to go through the evolution of this practice from the Ailu to the co-optation of Minga during the Inca Empire, when it was called Minca, by the Spanish colony, how it was also co-opted in the encomienda systems. And in the thesis, I also go through the various richnesses, but also downsides of such practice. to precisely not romanticize this practice, but studying it in its complexity. So if from one side we see that it's part of a teamwork, of solidarity, of satisfaction for a common good, it is also true that it's an unpaid work, that it has time and energy consuming. In some cases, as many have studied in the 70s and 80s, you were obliged to do mingas. And in many cases, there is also a lack of professional support. In the maps here, I illustrate Quito's auto-constructed neighborhood. It is an approximation, and it is an overlapping with them, with risk areas of landslides, for example. Income by neighborhoods, so darker it is, poorer it is. Ravines together with water streams. And this map reveals that the auto-constructed neighborhoods are inevitably located in the most dangerous areas, and mostly surrounded by ravines and rivers, and they almost entirely constitute the poorest areas of the city. So this is the location of the 3 case studies I worked on, and they are very different. They have been almost entirely constructed through processes of Minga. Then the process of consolidation in the last year, it's obviously different, but and they were built in very different periods of time. Of the 3 cases today, I decided to talk about the case of Atucucho. As many of you will know, it is located in the northwest of the city at 3,100 meters. And now it has a population of around 17,000 inhabitants. And it was the outcome of an illegal occupation of land that was owned initially by the Ministry of Health. So the land initially constituted of a dense eucalyptus forest, which between the 1st and 5th of April of 1988 was considerably reduced to the tireless work of the first occupiers. In the absence of the state support, the community autonomously faced many needs of basic existence. And the direct relation with the leaders of Atucucho, it was most related to NGOs and some international organizations. Since the beginning, a group of leaders managed the first collective action. For example, one of the very first things they did, it was to create the Junta de Agua, the water board. And it was called La Ciudad de los Palitos because it was constructed with the wood of the eucalyptus. Then they started connecting to electricity, then the very basic school, and then the church, and so on. And women, often pregnant, were the real constructor and fulcrum of the communal life development. And all the mingas, in most cases, can be related to processes of social innovation, which in most cases channeled social empowerment. And minga, apart from being practices of sharing and teamwork, as I was saying before, require lots of time and great physical effort. The neighborhood organization is basically that was present in the past in almost all neighborhoods of Quito. It was obviously the assembly, a complex machine of dialogue, represented by a president and other members, and all topics concerning the neighborhoods were voted through a hand prize to a process of direct democracy. And the topic of the neighborhood assembly, it's a very complex one. And in Quito, there are still few. And the one of Atucucho is still one of them. So with the eyes of the architect and of an urbanist, particularly from my perspective, so an European perspective, it is very easy to criticize these places, either for their aesthetics, often precarious settlements, for little coherence between building styles and lack of public spaces and services. But from the other, it is also easy to romanticize the effort of the poor. So the reading and my real interest was to understand how many events, actors, minga, shape this territory, because it represents a way of doing urbanism which cannot simply be tagged as informal. What I did between 2014 and 19 was an incredible amount of fieldworks and interviews, and I wanted to reconstruct the entire history of this neighborhood to study precisely which have been the impacts on space of mingas. And to do so, now I won't have the time to dig too much into it, but I invented a complex methodology of representation, which I called chronotopoline, which mixes time, space, and citizens' involvement. And here you can see that what I've been doing, it was basically collecting all the internal events that happened since Atukucho was created until our days. So the different meetings, the different creation, the different relationships. And on the top, what I did, it was basically identifying big national events, like the oil nationalization, the transformation from sucres to $2, and so on. And then what it comes, it's basically an evolution in time of the neighborhood. And in red, you see what it has been done through Mingas, and in black, it is what has been done privately. And this line that goes up and down is the intensity of participation. So what I identify, I see that how much the city is transformed collectively in moments of very intense participation, and in others, which basically participation is inexistent. And I try to understand why does this happen, looking at the different events and the impact that internal, external events and actors could have had in space. Then by zooming in, I identify which have been the practices which have done collectively, like collective boundaries, access to slopes, and in the years, the creation, for example, of new roads, of the school, and then on time, the creation of a sport field, of a fountain, of the church, the road paving in the last years, and even in more recent years, what it has been called mega mingas, which are those institutionalized mingas promoted by Quito municipality since the mayor Paco Moncayo. Before they were called mingas 50-50, and they plan that in a neighborhood that needs infrastructural work, like roads paving, trash collection, and water canalization, the municipality offers the machinery and invites local citizens to do mingas, but without remuneration. And I've been looking at it with a very critical eyes, as it is an extremely contradictory practice and process that happens just in poor places, even though citizens are citizens like everyone else. They pay taxes as everyone else, but in order to do things fast, their work is asked for free, which, as I say, it's quite contradictory. So by observing this context, living condition, and it could be uncomfortable and potentially unsafe for inhabitants, for this exaggerated density, extremely narrow street, constructions on slopes and risk of landslides, lack of public spaces. But if some collective urban project were somehow supported by external partner, this might have been not happened. But what I want to underline here is that what I found is that development in these cases tells us that it could be channeled in completely other ways than the one we're used to, that are driven by markets. Providing progress is not at all cost monetizable. And in this sense, the multidimensional set of stakeholders, which have included university, like the case of Comité del Pueblo, NGO, like in Atukucho, or international aid organization, like in La Comuna de Santa Clara de San Millán. So with all their contradiction, this community showed alternative ways of city making. And this demonstrates how collective space can be co-created and collectively maintained. The last part that I will show is about the research. So the title of my thesis is actually Quitopia. And it is about how Quito would look if some of the principles I mentioned you at the beginning of the Buen Vivir and the institutional framework would fully followed, and if cultural practices of city making, such as the Minga, were deeply taken into account, how Quito would look like. So the result is a very personal utopic scenario, which is not a forecast, and overall it's utopic, which is in its sense, it's provocative, and it is done to question and rethink how city could actually be done. So as I said, Mingas before the Buen Vivir we know that the state and policies were generally not involved, that people met in assemblies that were done very splendidly. With the mega mingas, we have a process of co-optation of a century-long practice where decision on where to go to do mingas are basically decided into the municipal offices and not anymore through the assembly. And and people is basically, they have to do it if they want to have a better neighborhood. So mingas in Utopia, we take as a central role the one of autonomy and the one of decision making at the local scale. And it sees of what would happen if the municipality, instead of deciding what to do, would actually provide the support of professionals. And the decision at the local level would be decided at the assembly scale. So here clearly we have to consider, I mean, from how much utopic we could be, there are places in the city that cannot be co-managed and cannot be administered at an assembly level. And the spaces are the map on the left, which include, for example, private buildings and private properties and highways and so on. And due to the complexity of the use of these facilities and amenity require solely the intervention of experts figures. But on the other map, this map right here illustrates Quito's potential places, for me, in which a project of co-invented and co-produced and co-maintained could work in the future. And this site creates a constellation of potentialities at different scales. So these two main phases of the city, either managed by institution or cooperatively, can be, as Bernardo Secchi would say, two antagonistic images. And this map, indeed, following his teachings, are images produced by something reductive. It's a reductive presupposition since the beginning, by interest and by cultural background that are partially incompatible with each other. But when I was looking at examples of minga in the city of Quito, I've been seeing that actually many mingas have been done for in local parks, for conserving, for planting, for constructing playgrounds. And knowing that that this was done at the neighborhood scale, I basically took all the places that are local park, and I took the radius of accessibility of those places. Afterwards, you will see it better. I did the same with rivers. So I've been seeing and I've been mapped practices of mingas that took place in Quito in the past years of water cleaning or bank restoration, of involving different neighborhoods. And then with the quebrada, with the ravens, Quebrada Ortega is one of the most famous examples, right? And the same with the sports fields. So what it came out in the Quitopia is that a metropolitan plan where potentially all the self-managed spaces are inserted into a map that shows the radius of influence of each section. And showing hypothetically how shared spaces could be managed and maintained and actually decided at the local level, I would imagine that people would be supported by the state and by this technician. Then what I've done is that I took the chronotopo line of the beginning, I used it as a palimpsest, and I built on it what could happen also at a smaller scale. But now I will go to the conclusions. So the message that I would like to leave by showing you this research is not that the future of cities should entirely be based on autonomy and self-management, but that reflecting on inclusion, when we're talking of urban design, it is crucial, and it is complex, and it is fascinating. And considering culture of city making in each specific environment should be critically embraced when we are designing from the architectural scale to the urban scale. And I think that is really time to break these dichotomies where the urban planner looks at policy, the urbanists look at the design, the sociologists and historians at people and history. So attempt to be inclusive requires cooperation, and not just between disciplines, but with people. And finally, using utopias as an exploratory research tool might be an eye-opener to challenge systems that seem unbreakable. It might help to practically reflect on what does it mean to design in a decolonial matter, and what development should mean if we look at something that goes beyond the modernist paradigm. So for me, it's all, and I'm very open to all your questions.
Thank you very much. I found it a very interesting lecture on to try to give a quite nuanced image what a Minga is, and especially for us in Europe or in other continents that doesn't know Minga that well. It's a very fascinating element, which indeed has very positive aspects of self-management, self-construction, solidarity, small scale, local, but indeed also some critical issues as like you called it, the kind of institutional Mingas, where we, of course, in Europe says, not, this is not our task, this is task of the government to do those kind of elements. I have a first question and then I open to all the others. Do you think that Minga, due to migration, globalization, are diminishing, eroding, being something more and more strange to the communities, or it's been more and more absorbed in an institution? So like you said, that local governments are just taking it up as something handy.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. So, of course, when I was analyzing the Quito through the interviews, overall to the first invaders, if we call it like this, so old people, they were telling me we're doing Mingas every time we had the time, in the night, in the weekends, whenever it was possible. We wanted to improve. And then, of course, it was like the way of starting living in the city and starting to have the life that they wanted. When I was in Quito, I've been attended to some Mingas. But overall, I remember one, it was done in the commune of Santa Clara de San Millán. So we're talking of a context, which is a communal context, which is different from the rest of the city. But then others that were more, for example, in La Floresta, I've been seeing in Quito Mingas of young persons and from school and university that were cleaning and painting the street. Of course, there are less and less, but I think that it's something that is still extremely embedded in the culture of Quito's inhabitants and not only. So I think it is, of course, not something that should be imposed as a way of doing, but that if it was flanked together with experts, for example, urbanists and sociologists, they could bring their technical support. And it's not really about realizing everything that people want, but it's about, you tell me what you think is best for your neighborhood. I tell you what I know from a technical point of view. Let's discuss about it. Let's see what the policies are. Let's see what the funds are. This is, of course, a very long process. It's much faster than the municipality decides from top and says what to do. But I think that Mingas can definitely be a way to involve more and more people in the city making and management.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there other questions? Because we are almost 180 people, raising hand is sometimes quite difficult to see because we don't see everybody. Or you can ask, or you can just talk or put something in the chat and then we will see and give you the word. Are there questions? From perhaps people that have been joining Mingas or somebody else? I'm trying to. Well, I have 8 pages I'm looking towards. Well, while people are putting stuff in the chat, I have a second question. Because Minga is a very cultural embedded issue. Could it be transported at some way to other areas in Latin America that doesn't have Mingas, or to Africa, Asia, or even Europe?
Yeah, this is a great question. I've reflected a lot about it. I think that the approach of transferring something is wrong since the beginning. So it's not about, oh, they do something very interesting there, let's do it somewhere else. No, I wouldn't. I would rather, and it takes longer time, study the place and study, okay, what they do in Africa. Do they do a Minga, or they do anything similar? And in Africa, Africa is huge. So what they do in a specific place. And I ask myself a lot, how would it work in Europe? Do we have, in our so variegated context, anything related to it? Since how many centuries we don't have the assemblies that are still existing, but they are called somewhere else. So I think it's really about studying a specific place and understanding which is the way in which city feel comfortable and happy to cooperate. Imposing something from top will never work, and but I'm sure it is very in there is, but also in Europe, for example, I can't remember if it was in Denmark, there is the talkut. It is called talkut, but it works exactly as the Minga. In Mali, there is also another practice which has a different name. So I think it would be, this is what I would like to do next. Understand if practices which are similar, how do they work in other parts of the world? Yeah.
Because indeed, I can imagine that in, let's say, a smaller autarkic communities, it's an almost evident practice. It's also probably linked to the kind of commons of a long time ago, perhaps less to the present commons, but the commons in England where people joined probably, and it's also probably linked to the religious groups of building together a church and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it does. In the research I've been doing, yes, it does exist. It's getting lost, but I think that if principles are changing, and if, as example, in Europe, we're talking so much about the European New Green Deal, and in the United States, the New Green Deal, and so on, what does it mean? Maybe collectively, actions could be thought at the city level or at the regional level that see clear objectives that are shared between everyone. So it's not really about paving a road, but it's really about taking care of our environment. Those are objectives that could be shared into different communities together, absolutely.
I have a question from Andres. Do you want to ask it yourself, or do I have to read it? I'm trying to find you, but it's hard. Andres is asking, could you tell us some ideas or suggestions for the people and for the places that are starting this Minga process in order to guide the Minga to grow in future cities, in order to guide the Minga to grow in the future in cities?
Yeah, sure. I think that everything could and should be based at the level of the community. So it doesn't just mean at the level of the municipality, but as I've been seeing Mingas in sport leagues. I've been seeing Mingas in religious things. So it's really about that if you, for example, are part of a community, of a neighborhood, and you know neighborhood leaders, that is something that is very common. I saw in Quito. And I think that everything should start by the people that know most the community. So, for example, those leaders that have some way of diffusing the ideas, and it's about doing assemblies. So, call people for. We have a problem, which is, I don't know, a trash dump, or this street it's doesn't have trees anymore, or we think that this playground is all dirty. So if people start talking, it's really also with WhatsApp. I've been seeing it in other cases in Manabi actually, that people really start organizing in other ways, not just really in an assembly all together, but they're just, okay, this is the problem, let's meet this day. They start talking and then they start involving people. So I think it could spread in very, very many different contexts. And it is a way of really, I think it is the right to the city done into action. You have the right to shape what you're using every day, because you are not just citizens, but because you're part of the community, and because you are active in what you're doing. You not just wait for the administration to do it. And this is a right that is written in the Ecuadorian constitution.
Somebody else? Of course, at the end, you can still have questions. We'll quickly go to the pages to see hands. Okay, let's go then to the next lecture. Thank you very much again, Giulia. The next person that will give a lecture is Mónica Rivera. She's an architect, urbanism, and landscape historian. She's currently an advisor for the planning department in the municipality of Cañar. She's an associate researcher for Urban Andes program, where she investigated sustainable mountain urbanization in the Andes. Mónica has been an architect in Ecuador since 2002 and received a PhD degree in architecture and urbanism from the KU Leuven in 2019 also. She also has a master's degree from the Polytechnic Institute and Virginia State University in 2006, and a master's degree in history and theory of architecture from McGill University in 2007. She has taught in several academic courses, including landscape, urbanism, architecture design, history and theory of architecture, and architecture representation in the United States, Belgium, and in Ecuador. The title of her lecture is Water Security and Public Space in Peripheral Neighborhoods of Ayacucho.
Thank you. I'm going to share my presentation for this works. Okay. You can sit.
Yes. But we don't see it in a full screen.
Try it again. For some reason, it doesn't. It's not sharing.
It's okay like this. I guess everybody
Here.
can.
It's.
Monica, maybe, I don't know if you have it, but on top, for example, in my case, I have view options and an arrow, and maybe you can try that, but yeah.
Yes, on top you can.
Yeah, I'm gonna open just a PDF, I think, so.
Yeah, and then you can fit to window.
So, sorry, you were saying?
Indeed, if you go to the view options, you have fit to window perhaps, or you can enlarge it.
Yeah, well, that's what I've been doing, but well. Yeah. No. There, I think might be too heavy, the file.
I don't know if Gita is here. I saw her in the chat, but I don't know if, because yesterday we had the same problem with another presenter in another meeting, and they solved it.
I'm gonna just make, let me stop sharing. Yeah, let me just make a PDF of this, and I think it will work better like that. Yeah, I think it's because the file is heavy. I apologize for the inconvenience.
Somebody saying, do you have two screens
Mm.
or only one screen?
I only have one screen.
Okay, because if you have
I
two,
want just to share the full screen instead the application, Monica. Maybe that would work.
Yeah, I did all of that too. Okay, let me share. I already have a PDF, so I will be sharing that.
okay. Sorry, this is fine. Monica, you are frozen. So being online is a positive that we can invite many people. Being online has, as we all know, also some negative elements of technical issues and longing for just being in a lecture room physically. Is she still here? Monica, are you still here or are you?
I think she's having some problems with the internet.
She left.
I think we had another question for Giulia, so
I'm
maybe we
here.
can.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yes, with pleasure.
Yes, well, we have another question indeed, sorry. While Monica's trying to, Anna, will you ask it yourself or shall I? I don't know where Anna is, sorry, I have to. So,
Yeah.
Anna? Okay. Anna?
Do we have to unmute her? Let me see if I can.
Yes, I have, I don't know.
Okay, Anna.
I'm not the organizer.
Yes, there you
Hola.
go. Hello, Giulia. Greetings.
Hello. Hi. We know each other, so it's great.
It's really nice to see you here. Well, my question was, and first of all, thank you for exposing the Minga, because Minga is something we have in our ADN, no? And we do Mingas inside our houses, and during the pandemic crisis. Yeah, this is really nice to hear. My question is, like, how would you advise these disciplines, like from new architects or anthropologists, sociologists, to really accompany the self-generating processes of the inhabitants of these communities? Like, I understand that working in these places, with the experience, I understood that people already know how to organize, how to plan, and how from that scenario, how these disciplines should accompany this process.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So from what I could suggest and what I've been seeing, to me, it's really about understanding the objective. So if you are an architect or sociologist, then you start talking about this with other colleagues and you realize that it is something that it could actually work in your community. It is really about spreading the word, and we have many ways of doing it. So one, it could be of simply diffusing via Facebook, via WhatsApp, via whatever you feel between your group and saying, we're having an assembly. And then in this assembly, you diffuse it to everyone, and then you ask to people what do they think are the most urgent things to be done in the neighborhood. And if you have it already clear, and an exercise could be what I've just done. So it is about start from scratch. You know what Minga is, you know what the potentialities are. If you know that the objectives for you, in your case, for example, is to be about planting trees, it is about understanding where to, and you decide this with the community. Where do you find these trees? So it's about establishing relationship with viveros or whatever, with the municipality, and saying, we are a group, we would like to do this. Can you finance us this part? Why don't you come to our assembly? So it's really about establishing relationship and having a constant dialogue with different kinds of stakeholders. So at the beginning, of course, it might be hard to start this organization, but if you feel that there are issues, that you are not the only person who thinks it's good and should be done, I think that as soon as you start talking to people and meet, basically, or also with the Zoom, I mean, right now you don't really need to meet in a place. It would be great to be done in the future. And start discussing. And if there are the architects, well, it would be nice, and the urbanists, that at the meeting they bring a map of the neighborhood and they share it with everyone. So you start discussing on a tool that is there that everybody can see. The good thing is to try to simplify it, not show a very complex architectural map, because people who are not architects might not understand it. But you're sort of simplifying it, and you use it as a screen, as a table to start discussing. So it's about, where do you guys live? Here, here, here. You start localizing yourself. Okay, what do we want to do with this park? And people will probably start saying, oh, I want a playground. Oh, I think it's dirty. And so you start collecting those things. And then you start voting. And then you start deciding, okay, what about if next Sunday we all meet there? And we start doing things. And I think that this could be the way, very basic, very from bottom up. And try to involve as many experts or professionals as you can, and work with the sociologists and the architects and the urbanists. I think that is really, that's the point. And if the municipalities sees and understand that actually people can organize, will give always more importance to this, because it's in the interest of the well-being of people. So why not? I hope I replied.
Thank you very much. Mónica, are you back?
Yeah, I'm here. Hopefully it's work now.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, I'm just gonna stay with the screen as it is. This is the way it appears.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you see it, please?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, so this presentation will deal with the urban design proposals developed by the program Urban Andes in Ayacucho, Peru. I had the opportunity to coordinate this program in 2019. And the proposals were carried out through a collaborative design process that took place before, during, and after the International Urban Design Workshops that took place in Ayacucho in 2018 and 2019. This presentation will make emphasis on the 2019 proposals, but also I will be dealing with the process itself, with the process of working with the actors, with the local actors. Urban Andes is a research and design-based project that ran from 2018 to 2020 as a conjunct effort between CAIU Leuven and the University San Cristobal of Huamanga, the local university, and it was coordinated by the Center of Water Competencias, CCA, from Peru. It was funded by BLIR and also by USAID. There are three main ideas that will keep coming in this presentation. One is that the design of our environment is a conjoint effort. We need to draw upon any resource that we have to outreach all the institutions that we have in the territory we are trying to work. We need to look and look for the local actors. Not always they are desiring to participate, but their participation is crucial for the success of the processes of design. So understanding also the other idea is that understanding the social context is key to successful processes of design. And also, of course, not only the social context, but the physical context, the area that we are studying. But in the last instance is the people who really have the capacity to implement whatever ideas we are trying to put there for them. The last idea is that we need to broaden the notion of what is knowledge and who is a knower in the process of design. So this tries to put forth the idea that the process of design needs to move from an expert-oriented process towards a more inclusive process of participation where people really can have a voice. So I will be doing this in this structure. I will talk a bit about the project itself, or Project Andes, the Urban Andes, making a brief presentation of what the process of urbanization of Huamanga, and finally presenting the proposals that were developed, design proposals that were developed in the second workshop that dealt more in the urban area of Huamanga. So the program Urban Andes tackles the issue of water insecurity and sustainable urbanization in the Andean settlements. And we do so embracing urban context and also rural context. Then we did this in the first workshop. We worked more in the rural area, in the rural environment. We take as a case of a study the Cachi watershed in Ayacucho. Since this is a representative case of a place with very limited resources, hydro resources. This in one hand, and in the other is that Ayacucho or Huamanga is a city that experienced a very accelerated urban process. And this process also occurred in an informal way. That is the other issue. So I will be dealing with that as well. The project Urban Andes, this is the city of Huamanga. The project Urban Andes springs from the research program Agua Andes. And this program is led also by CCA, and this develops scientific and multidisciplinary research about hydric resources. So in a sense, let's say that this brings the first idea that I was talking, that we need to make a conjoint effort for designing our environment. And that means that we need to draw upon all the available resources at hand. We had a project already. It was a scientific project nonetheless. This project had already developed relations, or had developed a network in the territory with several actors from the territory and from outside. Actors that were from the academia, that were ONGs, but also funding actors that were funding other types of projects. So we draw upon all those resources. And very importantly, there was a local actor set up, the Centro de Desarrollo Agropecuario, who had worked for more than 30 years in this territory. And had already an institutional as well as a territorial accumulated knowledge, which constituted a strong asset for Urban Andes as a project. The practices of SEDAP engaged directly with the communities, and their way to operate holistically also informed a lot our project. They worked with the people at the level of, let's say, of education, understood from them what they knew about their own hydric resources, how to protect them, They also work in building a small and medium scale infrastructure for water retention. They learn from them and they transmitted it back to other communities. So the setup works with projects, different communities for a time of 5 years in each community. So they have this chance of learning from the local practices, improving this knowledge, making this more technical maybe, and then transmitting it, passing it over to other communities. So they do this across the territory of Ayacucho. Other of the things that they do, they small and medium water retention infrastructure. They also work in agricultural production. They work in establishing markets for the selling of their products, and also in the construction of the capacities of the leadership of the young people in this community. So they work in a whole range of activities, and this informed very much the way in which we had to work in the territory. Being in the rural territory as well when we are in the urban territory. So the knowledge that we acquired, this knowledge was key for acquiring understanding of the context and the base for the development of the two landscape urbanism workshops that we organized in the city of Huamanga, and that were central to our project. So we also learned, as Giulia had exposed, about the Minga, about the processes that were already rooted in the communities. It was more about really giving attention to what is already in the territory, in terms of the physicality of the territory, but most importantly, in terms of the practices that people have. Because putting attention to the practices that the people have allows you to implement tools or actions that can profit from all the existing practices of them, such as the Minga. Other practices are the exchange of work, how they deal with agriculture, even in urban contexts, because many of the people that have come to inhabit the peripheries of Ayacucho came out from, escaping terrorism during the 80s. So they came to live in Ayacucho, in Huamanga, but they carry with them all their baggage, all their cultural baggage. And between that baggage were their practices, the way in which they do things. And also we learn about the water capacity of cohesion that has. So the 2018 workshop focused on the broad scale of the basin. Then the participation of the local population show us how they did things, and show us that they already had ideas about how they want their territories to be. They had these very beautiful practices of mapas parlantes that they had developed with SEDAP, in which they draw their community, what they want to have in their community in the next 5 years. They not only drew this, they even did embroidery with this type of imaginary. So we really learned the need to brought the notion of what is knowledge, and to really listen to this, to the community as knowers in this process of design. Our, of course, the workshop had the objective to bring together planners, decision makers, scientists, designers through the process of design, and talk around this process of design, while formulating water urbanism strategies for the resilience of the region. No, but being in the site really nourish and put make it very visible the need to incorporate in a stronger way to the people and how they worked and how they saw themselves, their territory. So going to the city of Huamanga, the peripheral neighborhoods of Huamanga emerged out from informal processes of occupation, of land occupation, after the most tragic episode of terrorism that Peru has had in its history. The exodus of rural population towards the city triggered an accelerated process of urbanization that occurred in all directions. And it happened regardless of the adverse conditions to urbanization, like strong slopes or existing vegetation, and very importantly, in despite of the lack of water, that it is what we find in Huamanga. Between 1980 and 1992, the urban population of Huamanga increased in 60%. So the process of informal urbanization continues today. And it continues, and it happens in places with very poor conditions for urbanization, especially in the steep slopes, as we can see here in the Picota, that surround Huamanga. And this comes as well with the strong processes of landscape degradation, like deforestation, erosion, and the lack of, or the loss of soil's capacity for hydric regulation. The condition informality and the material precariousness of these neighborhoods are at the base not only of the poor quality of their public spaces, but also are an imminent risk to the safety of the city, which is at the valley, and at the risk of its own population, of course. So the last Huayco that suffered, or a very strong Huayco that suffered Huamanga was in 2009, sorry. And there was, sadly, with the loss of human lives. So because of this, the city made some arrangements, let's say, but the solutions consist mainly of hard infrastructure, the construction of hard infrastructure, which is not enough. So what they did is to make canals underground along all the streets that are going, that are coming from the slopes towards the city, trying to prevent future huaicos. However, every year these floods and huaicos keep repeating themselves. So the second international workshop, what we did, we tried to improve to increase the participation of local actors. So for this second international workshop, there was a team working in the site 3 months ahead of the arrival of the group of professionals that were selected and who work in the proposals. Working sessions, we had a working session with local authorities, with the people in charge of several departments of the municipality, as well as with institutions in charge of the provision of water and sanitation, and also with the Ministry of Dwelling and Sanitation. Is the same ministry in Peru. So our objective was to increase drastically the participation of local actors, since that was a lesson learned in the first workshop. We also held informative sessions for locals to explain how the workshop would work, how to engage and participate, and even how to apply for participation. As once the workshop starts, are very intensive sessions of work. It was a 10-day, 12-day workshop in Huamanga. So, and even as not everybody has the same time availability, we made flexible modes of participation in the workshop. Again, having in mind that our environment, the design of our environment is a conjoint effort. So we really wanted to have the actors, the people who live those environments engaged in the process of design. So this work ahead also had the objective to put together all the necessary information for the participants who would arrive and who would have very little time to get to know the details of the city. So digital and printed information was put together and ready for them before they arrived. In dialogue with the government and attending also to the priorities, as well as trying to deal with the ongoing plans and projects of the municipality, 3 sites were selected to work. These were 2 informal neighborhoods. Well, I call them neighborhoods, but they really have a lot of population in them, are broader than a neighborhood. One is Mollepata at the north of the city, and La Picota on the west of the city, in the slopes of the west of Huamanga. And the other is La Alameda, that was a project of recovery of all the river and the river sides. And this, as I was telling, trying to make an impact or trying to secure the impact that the workshop would have, we really try to engage with the projects, the ongoing projects of the municipality. So this really can be later be of service, let's say, to the municipality, and the design proposals that we develop in here can become a material for envisioning futures, for negotiation, a material for the municipality as well as for the population to negotiate with the authorities. So the process of the workshop was laid off in a way that we had several times of participation with local actors. We had a kick-off presentation by local authorities, by departments of the municipality, by ministries of Peru. We had a chance, we got people engaged in the environmental departments or the people who work for the water department, etc., to accompany us in the fieldwork visits. We also, during already the days of the workshop, we scheduled working sessions with local specialists and authorities. So we had people, biologists working with us, we have chemical engineers, we have civil engineers, we have a multidisciplinary, a really multidisciplinary group. And this group also was of people working for the different instances of the government, and also had other instances in which we had contact with the local population. For instance, we had the intermediate presentations and the final presentations in which these were public, open to the public. So we invited the local population of these 3 sites that I showed you in the previous slides, and they were present there. We really wanted to have their feedback. They really corrected us in assumptions that we as designers can do, but that their reality showed them differently. And they exposed all those things. We had the opportunity then to correct our designs. And finally, we had a final presentation and later a public display and exposition of the designs proposals in which our participants exposed the results, the proposals to the general public. Post the workshop, we also reached out the communities. We had a team who went to the places, to the communities that we engaged, and that we exposed to them the proposals and lead them also the work to them. So I just want to go to one of these sites, which is La Picota. Now, in La Picota, the proposals were oriented to, or were guided by a research question. How we can turn this hillside that currently is a source of risk into a protective element of the city. So the precarious conditions of habitability and persistent risk condition of the continuous process of urbanization of La Picota poses several problems that needed to be addressed. For one side, we needed to propose a urban drainage system appropriate to the topography of the place. We needed to control the erosion of the slopes. There was basically null public space, so we needed to generate public and green space in this neighborhood. And there was also need to improve the connectivity and the pedestrian mobility in the area. So the proposed designs in La Picota, the proposal in La Picota is a collection of strategies, several strategies that tries or that aim to transform the slope into a large green infrastructure for Huamanga. So these slopes that are perceived as a threat to the city can, because of the excess of water that causes landslides, especially in the streams, can be used otherwise. Because in contrast to this perception of risk because of excess of water, the people living in La Picota experience lack of water. They really have a scarcity, water scarcity is in a daily basis. So this needed to know, to be aware of the water structure that we have in La Picota, also the equipment structure that we have, let me go here. We have a more urban area. This black area is more consolidated as urban. In the green areas, we have a more nature, let's say. There is not really, currently there was not really much more vegetation, were very eroded sites. However, they sites had the potential of becoming those areas for retention of water. And the upper side is like the plateau, the top of the hill. So what we did here was to identify several strategies that we could propose. Of course, thinking in what the people could do as a community over the time. So many of these proposals would be done through communal work. Other proposals, other strategies would need more intervention or more economical support from the government. But really always was the idea of things, of strategies that we consider people could also engage in the construction of this. And that not only that, but the people had the experience of doing that. For instance, in the case of the recovery of the creeks, was engaged also with the question of the construction of public spaces. As these areas, the only areas really left for people were the areas, the courses of water, the areas where water ran. Those were the only areas that were left from people, where people didn't build houses. So those were the areas that we really had for recovering the creeks. We had also for making, for improving the pedestrian pathways, and also for improving vegetation. There were, I'm gonna pass a bit faster in this part. Water, we needed to recollect and filtrate water. And in this case, we were proposing the construction of terraces. There is a knowledge about this. There is a accumulated knowledge of, mostly in the rural areas. But since people here have, a lot of people here have a rural background, we were trusting in that knowledge to be incorporated in the processes of co-production of these spaces. We had identified certain places in which public infrastructure could be built or was already built but needed to be improved. So we also projected different frames of time in which these actions could occur, and how to integrate issues like sanitary infrastructure, purification of water, with this type of equipment and spaces that we needed to come out and to work in this neighborhood. And the idea was that this water process would happen from up to the lower side. So we could accumulate, we could retain water in the upper areas, and they could be filtrating and purifying from the top down of the hill, and they could be reused in the lower areas. So incorporating in other areas the retention walls, vegetation, and pedestrian routes, because that was the way of moving. These paths, we recognize the existing paths, we redraw over those existing paths. We didn't propose things that the people were not doing. We tried to recognize the practices already existing in the territory, those traces, and to work with those traces. And finally, well, also we propose in other areas where there were less dwelling, less houses, productive zones in which we could, let's say, preserve those spaces, and trying that people don't keep building on those areas. So that would work, that at least was our proposal, with the incorporation of vegetation that also have an economic return to the community, so the community could take care of those areas in the sense of not allowing more informal settlements in there. The same, more of this incorporation of wetlands for the treatment of water, and the reforestation with native species, which allow us to make more compact this terrain in the sense of retaining this terrain. So this is a synthesis of the work that we did in here. Now in the first part, retaining water, filtrating water, and using water in the lower areas. Basically, what we have is in areas where we had mixed the nature with dwelling with houses. We're talking about inhabited park or in an inhabitable park, in areas where we would work more with vegetation in order to avoid further occupation of these lands. This also is a schema of a synthesis of the water management system proposed in this area, collecting water, filtrating water, and finally using water for the construction of the public spaces in La Picota. Well, that would be it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the lecture on let's say fast urbanism, and how can we go from fast urbanism to even a kind of sustainable urbanism, and at the same time an issue around participation and the belief in what we call local knowledge, local practices, and local design intelligence, how to incorporate that. I will start with two smaller, probably more general questions. If you believe in local knowledge and you believe in local practices, first, there is a kind of I have the feeling there's a kind of tension between the kind of small scale of the local knowledge and the local practices versus the kind of large scale of the urbanization that is going very quick in a different kind of scale. So how could you, let's say, upgrade the kind of local knowledge towards a kind of much larger scale urbanization issue that is not fully the same, of course, and linked to that, a lot of the local knowledge is often tacit knowledge, so knowledge that is not very explicit. So how can you detract those kind of tacit knowledge towards larger projects that you do?
Co-production takes a lot of work, right? That's that's for me like one of the lessons learned here. Is a very beautiful idea, but it takes a lot of work. In trying to answer to your first question, this the scale and the speed of urbanization cannot be stopped with large scale infrastructure, because even if it is very fast, it is coming from very little actions, persistent actions of people, individual actions. They, in most of the cases, they are not organized in a large social groups, but in small social groups. The communities have a limit. So there are things that we cannot scale. Like these solutions would have to be very diffuse actions in the territory or in the neighborhoods. It would have to work in really small groups in order to be more effective and in order to be more manageable. The Minga, for instance, is not something that you really can scale unless there is such a strength in the social body. And this strength we can only find in the rural areas, really, not in the urban areas. It's very difficult to find this strength in the urban areas. So in the urban areas, we must think more in smaller groups of people for working this or any other solution that can come out from the community. So this in one hand. In the other hand, we need to recognize that it is needed to engage in longer processes of design and to accompany populations. And this is something that we really learn from CEDAP, from this Center of Agricultural Development, who work in the rural areas. But they always that engage with a community engage in periods of 5 years. And after 5 years, they already had work, they work a lot with women and with young people in the creation of leaderships, because they were the population that really could keep doing that. Men were more prone to out-migrate the territory. So that's why they work with young people and with women. So that is possible to identify only when we engage in a bit longer process of transformation of the territory. So let's say these workshops that we have done with KU Leuven for several times, several places, are very fruitful in the sense of delivering proposals. But we need longer processes of design in order to really be effective in the territory. Otherwise, I feel more like anecdotal experiences could result in that. And if you remind me the second.
No, the kind of second question was a lot of the local knowledge and local design intelligence is tacit, it's not explicit. Yeah. So how do you get that kind of knowledge out of this group through participation, through the kind of speaking maps, like you told? I don't know. Do you have?
Yeah, those speaking maps, for instance, came out from a mutual process of learning, you know? Because as you very well pointed, the knowledge most of the time is tacit. And a lot of the time, it's not considered knowledge by the population itself. So it only emerges in a dialogue, in a dialectic process, in which really people can be engaged and their ideas taken in account. So, for instance, the workshop that we did, in despite that of all the effort that we put in having local people in the presentations, it was from, let's say, if 20 people came to our presentations, maybe 2 persons could speak something. So that is something that can develop as a skill, let's say, even in the own population over time, over repetition of these experiences. It's not going to happen in the first, not in the second, or in the third time that we meet. But eventually it will happen, and then we could really draw and profit from the knowledge of the communities.
Okay, thank you. We have a question. I don't know. It's an, I don't know the name. It's somebody from the Facultad de Arquitectura y Diseño from Guayaquil. I don't know, it's Felix or somebody else. Said, great presentation. Did this initiative have impact on the local planning, and what was the level of engagement of the municipality?
Okay, the municipality was all at hands in this project, but surprisingly, during the workshop itself, they even participated with our with the designers as well. But it is very hard to really get them to use the things, because all the designs at the end consumes material that they could take it further. Because, but we have tried, let's say, we have tried several times again making this with the municipality, but the political times are different. So there was a change of measure, and when there is a change of measure, there is a change of everything. So we have to start again. So that's why the importance of projects that have a longer spans of time, maybe. So yeah, we were successful, let's say, at the scale of the workshop, of engaging during the process of the design. We haven't been that successful on taking the designs further into the projects of the own municipality, in despite that we coordinate with them and we choose with them the places of intervention.
Okay, I have another question by Andres about urban strategies. How long does it take to implement all those very important strategies that you mentioned in this urban project? It could be divided into stages or phases to be able to apply them, and in what order of importance could it be organized?
Yes, and in the slides I show like different stages, like what was the initial stage, 5 years and 8 years proposals. Yeah, we really we also thought in what would need to be done first, no? Where you have to start, and what are the other things that we needed further support, economical support from the government, for instance. Yes, we develop in that way the proposals. Of course, what I have shown you are more in the level of ideas. We would need, if the municipality would have the, you know, the will to take it further, then we really need to take this in more detail, no? What can be done by people, by the communities? What can be done? What, in which instances we are need expert building? I mean, to contract other people. So that would depend. That really depends on the municipality. That is the important. The only actor in a city that really has the capacity, beside the community, of course, but it is the municipality. They really have the chance of planning, incorporating proposals in their annual projects. They really have, that is their jurisdiction, no? So it is really important in these types of projects to engage with the municipality. And in despite of that, it is difficult to get further. I think efforts need to be done to pass design tools to communities, to really to develop this sense that the skill of designing is not something that is only from an expert, but to acknowledge that the ways in which they perform their daily practices have a component of design. And that that idea is empowering, I think. Is empowering for the communities, because then the fate of the territories are not felt to be only in the hands of someone else, of someone up there in the governments that decide how the people in the communities live. So I think we still need a lot of work for really passing on that, no? From transiting from the expert-driven design to a more collaborative, plural, distributed forms of design.
But still, this urban project, how long will it last? Is it a project for, do you think, from the start to the end, for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years?
Of what the proposals that we say, it was thought in a time of like to the end, not to the end, but to the point it gets a form 8 years at least.
Okay. Then we have a comment again from the same person of the Facultad de Arquitectura y Diseño in Guayaquil, that it has to be sure that participation should not only depend on political changes, although of course it's very important to work together with the public agenda. So how do you tackle this kind of political changements and continuation or continuity?
Well, I think in that, for instance, for this project, we only got funding for 2 years. So we would need to, let's say from our point, we need to formulate long projects, no? For making this process of accompanying the processes. And once we can do that, we are not going to depend on the political changes, because the idea is to get a change in the way in which the community sees themselves as agents in the transformation of the territory. If we can get that, and that doesn't happen in 1 or 2 years, if we can get that, then we can become more autonomous of the political changes. I mean, authority changes.
Okay, and now I have an image of the person in the facultad, and it is Felix. But because we are still with 160, I had to scroll until I find it. Are there other questions or remarks, or I don't know?
Maybe if I can, I would ask a question to Mónica. Yeah? Okay, thank you. Mónica, thanks. Great presentation, really beautiful. I have a question, a very practical one. When I saw that you were showing to the communities the drawings you were doing, which are beautiful, were the ones that you showed us today, or were they somehow simplified? Just imagine it was very hard for somebody that's not an architect, never really seen technical drawings. How was the dialogue to show them your proposals?
Well, we show the drawings that I showed to you today, but also we have simplified versions. The very last image that I showed to you, it was a very, a very hand drawing style of design. So we try to do both, because really, as you well point, Giulia, we need to simplify the language. The spoken and the drawn language in order for the people really to engage with the community. But we don't have to underestimate the capacities, because those capacities of learning how to read those things also are acquired skills. So when I saw the maps, one of the drawings, the photographs that I show you, in which the communities, these were rural communities, even embroil the plans for the future. I have to say I didn't thought until then that they really had that I mean, I never seen that before in a rural instance in which people really are thinking by drawing their futures and envisioning by drawing their futures. So, and that less is a capacity that anyone can learn.
Yeah, thank you.
There's still some room for some last questions if needed. If somebody wants to take, like Ricardo put in the chat, if you want to raise your questions in Spanish, no problem. But still.
I have a question, if it's possible.
Yes, of course.
Thank you for the two presentations. They were really interesting. I have a question for Mónica. Here in Ecuador, in Guayaquil, you know, it's like the majority of the Latin American cities, we have these huge informal settlements that are at the beginning, they are informal. There is a high level of sense of community, but with the process of consolidation, people lost it. And you know, they begin, for example, here like cooperativas, we call them invasiones. And then after that, they begin to have, they keep the same name, but after 50 years, 40 years, there are groups of families and peoples or new generations that have other types of sense of communities. And Felix and Javier and Eve, we have been discovering that from, in the case of Santiaguito de Roldós, we have drug dealers, we have networks of narcotráfico. So how do you think this type of initiative would help to build again, or to maybe emerge again this sense of community that was lost during the process of consolidation? Maybe from, the question is open to Mónica or Giulia, as you want. It's open for all. Thank you. And congratulations again for the topics, are really, really interesting.
Thank you, Ricardo. I think, I don't know, Giulia, I think you have the experience of looking this, I mean, studying from the beginning towards the time in which that sense is lost. But yeah. I think that you really can propose is something new, but is extract something that it is present and maybe it's not that visible yet. But go ahead, Giulia.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's a very, very relevant question. Really, not just about Ecuador, not just about Guayaquil. It is so extremely common. Exactly. I think it was quite useful to study those neighborhoods from the very beginning when they were funded to the end, to nowadays. In my case, when I was showing you, the Carnotopo line, so the intensity of participation, we see it was going up, and then down again, and then up again. I would see why. Because they organized, because they did assemblies, because they received some funds from the UN, because some alcalde of the period financed something. And so you see it going up and down, but then it goes down. And so in my idea, in order to push it up again, to me, it was about looking at the constitution, looking at the national plan, looking at this is something that an expert could do, and see what it's actually possible. So why not the municipality start proposing and facilitating these assemblies again, but not with the idea of controlling, with the idea of knowing that if you give power to people, it's developing their environment, it's empowering, and they can take care more about everything. So in how many cases, one of the research I've been doing recently, it was about Manabí and the resettlements built after the earthquake, right? For example, Guavito, in Puerto Viejo, and so on. So also on there, you see various oscillation, and the drug dealing system, it's really, really high. But then you can see also that when people start aggregating, and for example, I could do another one. I think that this is really obvious. The topic of Quebrada Ortega in Quitumbe, south of Quito. There was no participation anymore in the 90s. People started consolidated, it was over. But what happened? This quebrada was a trash dump, and the kids were playing there. So what the mothers did, they started talking with each other and said, our kids are getting sick. We have to do something. And so they started cooperating and meeting and then involving more and more people. Well, this park nowadays, this trash dump nowadays, it's an amazing park. But also because they were able to contact the municipality and be constantly there. And if you have an objective that is so clear, I don't want my kids to get infected and to be involved in the drugs, people can really do a lot. So it's really about creating niches of will, and the municipality, of course, should go down and look a little bit how things are. Mm.
Yeah, but I would say it is, for me, it's really a process more from inside out. And this going down of the participation is, of course, it has to, it is related to the achievement of needs, let's say, but it is also related to nowadays lack of participation in general, no, of people. Really is like, I don't know, anesthesiated, there is that word. That, yeah, that it is like dumped, no, dumped of what it is happening to other people, what it is happening to my neighbor, what it is happening to, we only relate to our family in our medium, no? Sometimes security is a topic around people draws together again in consolidated neighborhoods. It can be any excuse is good, I would say, for trying to draw again, but it is a movement from inside the neighborhoods out. I in that sense, I would, I don't want to say agree, but I disagree, but I have my doubts regarding the municipality, for instance, doing this in neighborhoods really work the other way around, I would say, from the community, people of the community out.
Thank you. Is there other? Ricardo still has his hand up, or is it an old hand?
No, it's just a second comment. I totally agree with you both that in our constitution in 2008, there is for first time in our history in Ecuador, there is the word or the concept of the right to the city, and also the right, the nature has a rights or something so. But in the reality, and this is a self-critic to our national government and local governments, and especially to Guayaquil, the processes of public participations are not really effective. And the majority, as Giulia mentioned, and Mónica too, the majority of them are self-initiatives of communities that they want to change, and they even don't believe in the system. So this is like a parallel social system that survives. And I check it, it's very interesting because I checked it when I was in Germany. There was this movement in UK, transition towns. And I was extremely surprised that we have this in Ecuador and in many times of many places in the world, like the Mingas in the Andean areas, we have signs 100 years ago. So it's something related with the power of the municipality to include, even if it's in the constitution is perfect, but I think in the implementation, in the putting in practice these concepts, we are still very, very, how to say, not prepared and not ready. Even we in our history have several hundreds of years of practice this like in the Mingas. I think the municipalities should also take a look of other types of forms of doing public participation, even if the structure doesn't allow it or it's difficult for them. Nothing more. Thank you.
This also reminds me, another PG students of our research group is working on one of the largest markets in Africa. It's in Nigeria. It's in Onitsha, and there you would expect it. It seems, or it looks extremely informal how everything works, but it's super formalized, but in an emergent way. Which is logical because the kind of dichotomy between formal and informal is much complexer than they used to say it. But there's a kind of distrust towards the government having very Western, even colonized views on how the city would work, and the fact that they have their own system. And but in that case, they're so powerful because they bring so much money into the communities that they can just do what they do, but they regulate everything, and it's a super. But it seems when you look to it, it seems very informal structure where you say that communities are distrustful and take their own matter into hand, which probably in the beginning of the Mingas was a small community just doing their stuff. Are there other questions? If not, I want to thank Giulia and Mónica for the interesting lectures and for the discussion. The next webinar is on June the 9th. It is the same hour. The topic is Perspective on Designing in Latin America Informal Urban Areas. It's with Antonio Di Campli from the Politecnico from Torino and Gabriel Visconti of Agua Studio in Venezuela. And it will be in Spanish for all the persons that want to join. So we will put it also, well, it's probably already on the website, but we'll put it on other social media. So thank you very much. I just have a question then for Javier. Do we change, because we have a smaller meeting after this webinar, do we change, are we going out and do we change the Zoom, or are we staying in, or how does it work?
We can prepare another session, so this can be
okay. So thank you very much. For us here in Europe, it's not only evening but also the start of probably a long weekend, because tomorrow is Asunción, so we are not working like you also, but we already start earlier to this festivity.
Nice.
Not in Spain, unfortunately.
No,
I have to work. No, but it's okay. Enjoy your long weekend.
Especially in Spain, that they would celebrate this.
I know, I would have thought so, but
you can enjoy other things there.
Yeah. Okay, it was a pleasure. Thanks so much, really. It was very inspiring. Please keep us in the loop.
Thanks a lot for the invitation.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.